services, shelter support, and other assistance. Last week, Secretary Blinken announced an additional $54 million in U.S. assistance, and countries around the world have met the UN's humanitarian appeal with an additional $1.5 billion in support. But as you know, with 2 million refugees already and more than 1.2 million IDPs, needs will go up. Third, we've imposed severe sanctions on Russia's financial institutions, its oligarchs and political leaders, including President Putin and his cronies. We have levied export controls on key industries and the Russian military in close coordination with almost 40 countries around the world, representing over half the world's economy, and those sanctions have had an immediate impact. We're seeing a continued flight of capital, a tumbling of the ruble, it's lost half its value, rising inflation, higher borrowing costs, and evaporating access for Russia to global financial markets. There is more on the way from the G7, our EU partners, and countries around the world if President Putin does not end this vicious war. We're also working with our allies and partners to limit the disruption of global energy supplies and to prevent Russia from weaponizing its global energy exports, while also accelerating diversification of energy supplies. We sanctioned the parent company of Nord Stream 2 and its CEO, and the German government, as you know, has canceled its support for the pipeline so that it will not become operational. We are also using all multilateral fora to rally the world in condemning Russia and Belarus. As you know, last week, a record 141 countries voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution calling for Russia to end its war and withdraw from Ukraine, a historic outpouring of support and international solidarity. Days later, the Human Rights Council overwhelmingly passed a resolution establishing a commission of inquiry to investigate and call out Russia's human rights abuses in Ukraine. And in close cooperation with our NATO allies, we are strengthening the defense and the deterrence of the alliance's eastern flank. Allies agreed for the first time in the alliance's history to give the Supreme Allied Commander authority to deploy NATO's response force, including its spearhead component, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, the VJTF, and it is already beginning to deploy. U.S. military personnel in Europe and in its waters now total approximately 100,000. We've more than doubled our U.S. forces in Poland and sent thousands of troops to the Baltics, to Romania, and elsewhere along the flank, along with advanced combat aviation. A number of our allies are also starting to flow forces to NATO's east to bolster their presence and to fulfill their NATO obligations. So the message to Russia is clear. NATO is united, and our commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. President Putin has not only attacked Ukraine, he has trashed the UN principle of self-determination of states and questioned Ukraine's very right to exist. He is testing the foundations of international law, and he is testing all of us, and NATO, and the EU, and the G7, and democracies around the world. As President Biden said, we are now in a battle between democracy and autocracy, and free people, free nations, and a free Ukraine must prevail. As Putin tries to reduce Ukraine to rubble, he is also turning Russia into a prison. Credit cards and ATMs have stopped working, capital controls are biting deeply, imported food, technology, and other goods are drying up, and the last of Russia's free press has been strangled, all while the government hemorrhages money that belongs to the Russian people, to fund its war effort and to prop up the ruble. And last week, President Putin criminalized anti-war protests and efforts to support Ukraine. The so-called consultancy laws with Kyiv can result in 20 years in a penal colony. 30 years of progress in Russia has been wiped out in just 12 days. This is a war launched by one man for his own twisted reasons. It's a war built on lies he's told the world, he's told his own people, and his military. And now it is a war also built on the suffering and grief of so many Ukrainians, and also Russians. parents, spouses, partners, children who will never see their loved ones again, all because of one man's evil choices. Ukrainians are fighting for their nation's survival, but they are also fighting for all of us and for the principles of freedom and democracy that are foundational for our nation and for our allies and partners. Together, we must do all we can to ensure Ukraine not only survives, but it thrives again. We in the administration are proud to work with all of you towards that difficult but righteous goal. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll start 5-minute rounds. Let me start off with a letter that the Ukrainian Parliament sent us, and I want to read one paragraph of it because I think it creates context for everything we're deciding. As you read this, Russian troops are indiscriminately shelling civilians, residential areas, schools, and hospitals. The aggressor is using weapons prohibited by the Geneva Convention and international humanitarian law, such as cluster bombs and vacuum thermobaric bombs, intended to cause severe suffering to human beings. And when civilians try to escape the combat zones, Russian soldiers shoot at humanitarian, quote, green corridors, turning them blood red. I ask unanimous consent that the letter be included in today's record without objection. The spokesperson for UNICEF has said 1 million children have fled Ukraine, calling it, quote, a dark historical first. That spokesperson said, we have not seen a refugee crisis of this speed and scale since World War II, and this is a children's crisis. So against that backdrop, I understand that the government of Poland, a very little while ago, after consultations between their president and the government, are ready to deploy immediately and free of charge their MiG-29 jets and place them at the disposal of the United States of America. They decided not to go directly, but and of course they have concerns about the backfilling of that at some point in time in some way. Can you speak to that and where we're at in that regard now that the government of Poland has made that decision?
So, Chairman, I saw that announcement by the government of Poland as I was literally driving here today. To my knowledge, it wasn't pre-consulted with us that they plan to give these planes to us. But as you know, we have been having consultations with them for a couple of days now about this request from the Ukrainians to receive their aircraft, and were they to donate them, whether we would be able to help support backfill and their own security needs. So I look forward, when this hearing is over, to getting back to my desk and seeing how we will respond to this proposal of theirs to give the planes to us.
Well, they've moved forward now, and they have said that their planes are now disposable. They're willing to give it. The one thing that we have heard consistently is a call for a no-fly zone. I understand the challenges of that. NATO and other countries not willing to engage in a direct conflict with Russia, but giving Ukrainians the wherewithal to fight over their own airspace and to be able to have some control over their airspace is clearly desirable. So now that Poland has made this decision, and it would be my hope that other countries in the region as well, that we would be forward-leaning in finding a pathway forward. Because the one thing about all of this is time is of the essence. If we are going to make a difference, time is of the essence. Let me ask you this. We are doing all these sanctions. There's no one who has been an advocate of sanctions, generally speaking, and certainly in this case more than I have on this committee, but I'm wondering about cryptocurrency, because we are sanctioning all of the traditional financial and banking systems, but cryptocurrency is an opportunity for Russian oligarchs and others to move in a different direction. Are we having our Treasury Department and others think about how we deal with that challenge?
Mr. Chairman, we are. In fact, we have in the past, as you know, drained designated hacker wallets from Russia. We have other authorities that allow us to go after crypto. Not only are we looking at it ourselves, we are consulting with our European allies and partners on how we might do more together to close down this dangerous spigot of revenue.
Well, I think it's going to be one of the essential elements to continue to dry up every resource that Putin can have and to continue to tighten the noose, the economic noose around his neck at the end of the day. Lastly, what are we doing in having a full-scale assault? I said that I sent letters to all the regional secretaries. It seems to me that Putin should feel the consequences everywhere.
Yes.
And that means whether it be Latin America or Asia or Africa, we need to be at the forefront of pressuring Russia in all of those continents, in all of those countries. Are we actively engaged in doing that?
Mr. Chairman, we are. Not only are we pressing every country that we speak to at the President and the Secretary's level and all the levels in the department, every single one of our ambassadors has instructions to work with their host nations to try to get them to match U.S. and EU and allied sanctions to the extent that they can and are willing, to condemn Russia. And you saw the vote in the UNGA, 141 countries. There was significant, how should we say, diplomatic elbow grease went into that from allies and partners around the world. And as you know, we have a number of big countries who have abstained from this fight so far, and we are trying to use our influence with them as well to get on the right side of history.
I hope they get on the right side of history. Some of them I like very much, but they need to get there on the right side of history. Senator Risch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to associate myself with the remarks of the chairman regarding the JCPOA. And as I told you in private session yesterday, and I hope, I want to say it publicly here, and I hope you'll you will transmit this to the administration, as you said you would yesterday, and that is there couldn't be a worse time for the administration to be trying to come together on a JCPOA and announce it when we're in the middle of the mess we're in right now. The chairman mentioned reasons for it. There's another reason for it, obviously, and I think you saw that yesterday, and that is how united we are as the United States Senate in helping the Ukraine and what's going on diplomatically and otherwise when it comes to this struggle. I can't think of something you could do that would be worse to try to tear that apart than announce a JCPOA, because we are going to be very divided on it. You know, they started out saying it was going to be stronger and longer. There were two different bumper stickers, I guess. One was stronger and the other was longer. Both of those, as we know, are by the by. They then said, well, they were going to work to get less for less. Well, that's gone by the by. And from everything that's leaking out now, it sounds like it's going to be worse for worse. And I just can't fathom that we want to enter into that at this point. And as the chairman properly notes, it's going to cause a tremendous amount of cash to be transmitted to the Russians as a result of a new JCPOA for the reasons he discussed. There's no logical reason to be doing that at this time. Look, this thing's been dragging on. I know the administration wanted to immediately reverse what Trump had done, and I get that. But they've been at it now for a year and a half, and it certainly can be put off for another 6 months. I'm not asking that you end it. I know what you're going to do, and I know, when I say you, I mean the administration. I know what the administration's going to do, and I know how it's going to wind up. But at least put it on ice for 6 months till we get this mess behind us. So that's the plea I have on the JCPOA. I think it would be in everybody's best interest to do that. As I talked about in our closed hearing yesterday, I hope you will focus on, we hear a lot about Stingers, we hear a lot about the Javelin, we hear a lot about the Russian MiGs that other countries have. We'd like to get into the fight. But one thing that hasn't been discussed are other surface-to-air missiles between the Patriots, which are the big gun, and the Stingers, which are the small gun, I guess. And I really think they could do some good with some of those intermediate missiles. And I hope you will convey that to the administration and work on that. Finally, let me just close with secondary sanctions. I know they haven't, the administration hasn't reached for the secondary sanction tool in their toolbox yet. I would say, and I would urge, that the minute we see somebody trying to get around these sanctions or somebody trying to actually do business with the Russians, the secondary sanctions need to come into play. They can be used surgically, they can be used in a targeted fashion so that we don't injure somebody through collateral damage, either us or one of our partners. That can be done easily with the waivers. So I would urge again that they keep that tool at the ready in case they need to use it. And if you want to respond to any of that, you got 1 minute and 16 seconds.
Thank you, Ranking Member Risch. Let me just say, with regard to the weapons that we are sending to Ukraine, as you know, we talked about some of this in classified session yesterday, and we generally don't talk in specifics in an open session. But with regard to other systems that we might be able to send, we are working very hard and fast on that now. And we can speak further about it in another setting if you'd like.
That's good to hear.
With regard to secondary sanctions, I think you know that some of what we have done already, particularly the export control constraints, has global impact in the sense that anybody seeking to transfer American high-tech, anything at all to Russia that has American high technology in it, whether that country is Singapore or China or Germany or whatever, has to have a license. So that is our effort to create a global regime here. But as I said, we are also seeking to get more and more countries to join us in as much of this regime as possible. But we'll continue to look at all of these things that you raised. Look, we're not having a hearing about the JCPOA. I will simply say that there was extreme concern that this is not an issue that can wait, given Iran's acceleration of its development of technology towards a weapon. And the last thing we need is this war and Iran with a nuclear weapon. Thanks.
Senator Cardin.
Secretary Nuland, first of all, thank you very much. And we certainly appreciate the unity that the Biden administration has been able to achieve with our allies and the global community in isolating Russia and providing needed help to Ukraine and Ukrainian people. So we talk about that there is strong agreement to supply Ukraine with the defensive lethal weapons they need. And we've done that, and our allies have done that, countries have done that, and we've been pretty effective in getting that type of equipment to the Ukrainians. So I'm a little bit baffled as to why it's taking so long in regards to aircraft getting into Ukraine. President Zelensky's made it clear he needs it. There is strong unity among all of us that we should be supplying that. And I know that you're not up to date as to the most recent announcements made by the Poles in regards to the aircraft being delivered to Germany. But I would ask that if this is not going to be handled quickly, to please advise this committee. Time is of the essence, and we would like to see those planes there yesterday. So if there's additional bureaucratic delays in making this available, I think we want to know about it because we would like to be helpful in getting it to the Ukrainians as soon as possible. We mean like today. So if you could just make a commitment to let us know if there's going to be any delays in accommodating those aircraft, I would appreciate that. I know the committee would appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I did convey the strong bipartisan sentiment of the committee yesterday with regard to these aircraft, and will do so again based on this hearing. Thanks.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about Moldova and Georgia. If it were not for the Ukrainian resistance, and if Mr. Putin was able to overtake Ukraine in the time frame that he thought he would be able to do it, I dare say that there would be real concern that Mr. Putin may be on his way to Moldova and Georgia, non-NATO countries. So what steps are we taking today to help Moldova and Georgia, recognizing that if the circumstances change and Mr. Putin believes he has the ability, he would not hesitate to cross those borders. He already has. I mean, he's already in Moldova and Georgia in contested areas that are not contested, but only by Mr. Putin believing they're contested. What steps are being taken so that those countries are going to be in the best possible position to defend themselves in the event that Mr. Putin decides he's going to move more aggressively in those two countries?
Well, thanks, Senator Cardin. First, with regard to Georgia, as you know, we have a long-standing security relationship with Georgia. They have also contributed regularly to all kinds of NATO operations and NATO exercises and have received lots of U.S. military training and equipment over the years, and that program accelerated quite a bit after President Putin's invasion of Georgia in 2008. So that relationship is strong and continues to be strong. With regard to Moldova, as you know, Secretary Blinken was in Moldova, I can't remember, Saturday, maybe Friday or Saturday, and he went with the intention of showing U.S. support and seeking to understand better what their concerns are in the context of this war. And as you know, were Putin's troops to make that landing in Odessa, it's just a short hop up Transnistria, and Moldova would be next. We, in response to the president of Moldova's requests, we are looking at increasing not only our humanitarian support to Moldova, because they are also hosting lots of Ukrainian refugees, but border security and energy security and other things that that government has asked for, and we will continue to be responsive as we can.
So let me ask one additional question. As early as Thursday or Friday, we're going to pass an omnibus appropriation bill. It's going to contain a significant amount of funds for humanitarian assistance. Is the State Department prepared to be able to implement major supplying of humanitarian needs in regards to the refugees that have fled, as well as the people within Ukraine that need help? Are we have the capacity to make sure those relief funds and relief efforts are implemented immediately?
We are, Senator. In fact, as we saw these troops mounting on Ukraine's borders, we began working with UN agencies, with the Ukrainians, with neighboring states to stockpile humanitarian support. So much of what was initially available was the result of that stockpiling. We are now continuing to push humanitarian support into Ukraine, as are the UN agencies, and into Moldova, as I said. And Poland is also getting a huge amount of international support, as are Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, other countries on the front line. And we will do more together with our partners at AID and in the UN agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rubio.
Secretary Nuland, does the United States recognize Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela?
We recognize his leadership in Venezuela, yes.
Do we recognize him as the president of Venezuela? Is that not our official position?
It is.
So why would we meet with a dictator, Nicolas Maduro, without telling Juan Guaido or the ambassador here in the United States that it was happening? I know you told him afterwards. Why wouldn't we coordinate with them beforehand?
We did coordinate with them beforehand. We met with the opposition before that meeting.
You met with the opposition after that meeting?
I will take that. I think it was the other way around, Senator.
I assure you it was after that meeting, and certainly the ambassador feels that way. He was not aware of it until after that meeting. You are aware that the Venezuelan oil industry is in shambles after years of mismanagement, corruption, it's a personal piggy bank. They produce on a good day, about a quarter of what they're used to produce, what we would all remember as Venezuela. And every informed person in oil industry will tell you that if we were to buy all of it, and we can't because some of it's already contractually committed, it would be an insignificant impact on U.S. economy. So but it would be a huge benefit to Maduro. It would be millions of dollars for his personal piggy bank. So is this meeting, the secret meeting that occurred this weekend, which was published everywhere, is this part of a Russia strategy, or is it part of a general pivot in the broader Venezuela matter?
There's zero pivot in our Venezuela strategy, Senator. The first and foremost, and I can only talk about it to some extent in this setting. I'm happy to talk to you about it in another setting if you'd like, or after.
Well, it's not you,
hearing.
not because it's classified, but because it's confidential with another government, another country.
For a number of reasons, but first and foremost, the mission was about visiting and checking on the welfare of our incarcerated Americans, the Citco 6 and the other 2. And as you know, we have made regular visits to Caracas for that purpose. We were also seeking to get the Venezuelan government back to the table with the opposition in the internationally monitored peace talks. And then there were a number of other things that we discussed that I can talk to you about in another.
Why did they leave those negotiations? Do you recall?
They left them because they objected to the extradition of one of
Alex Saab.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
one of
the guy that
right.
was helping them to
Right.
steal gold and sell it to Iran.
But I think you'd agree that if they were willing to come back to the table with the opposition, that would be a good thing for the opposition's goals.
Actually, I don't really think it would matter. Maduro's he's a habitual negotiator, but he never leads to anything. That's why the Vatican won't even host him anymore. Other countries don't even want to be involved anymore. He uses negotiations the way Putin does, habitually, to divide and demoralize his opposition. I just don't understand why we think that cutting a deal with Maduro now to lift sanctions, as he yesterday bragged on television about that meeting and how it's the end of, and as they mocked Guaido, that meeting did tremendous damage to the person that we recognize as the president of Venezuela. It's incredibly troubling, and it would mean nothing. We would notice nothing. He's more than happy to agree to negotiations. He uses them to divide the opposition and demoralize them habitually, the way Putin has done as well. I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Last question. I am certain that the Russians were looking at their reserves as a way to buffer sanctions. Do you know how, now that we've sanctioned the central bank along with others, do we have an idea of what percentage of their reserves are frozen or inaccessible to them?
Virtually all of them are now frozen. You notice that the country's been under currency controls for almost 2 weeks now, and the whole point of putting so many of these top 10 banks under sanctions is to make it impossible for them to get access to their cash in hard currency.
Thank you. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here and for everything that the State Department and the administration is doing to help Ukraine. As I'm sure you're aware, I weighed in with Senator Portman over the weekend on the importance of providing jets through Poland for the Ukrainians after we heard from President Zelensky that that was his #1 request. And I understand that we are still working on that issue, that we had not coordinated with Poland before they made their announcement. Is that correct?
Not to my knowledge, and I was in a meeting where I ought to have heard about that just before I came, so I think that actually was a surprise move by the Poles.
And that one of the challenges is being able to backfill any planes that are provided to Ukraine. Is there a willingness on the part of other of our European allies to help support this effort?
Well, Senator, I think what's most important in the short run with regard to Poland is that they benefit from full air security from the NATO alliance. And as you know, the U.S. has increased our support to Poland, as have other NATO allies. So, and we're also looking at putting some Patriot batteries into Poland. So I think the main issue is to evaluate together what Poland's immediate needs are in the context of being a neighbor of this conflict.
And I certainly agreed with the line of questioning that you heard from Senator Rubio about the disinformation and what, if you want to know what Russia's planning, look at what they're accusing us of.
Exactly.
To what extent are we working with our allies on the responding to the disinformation that is out there that Russia's putting out? Because obviously the Baltic countries, Poland, a number of our Eastern European allies have long experience with responding to disinformation on the part of Russia. Are we coordinating that effort in any way?
Absolutely, Senator. I think you know the State Department's Global Engagement Center, which you all helped us stand up and supported, works 24/7 with other allies and partners, not just in Europe, but around the world, to bring to light Russian disinformation campaigns and who is pushing them. We also work with the tech companies to try to take down false stories, and we are working very assiduously on all of that now. We're also working to try to get truth into Russia in the context of a complete freeze on independent news going there, and that is an issue that is of paramount concern to all of us.
So how are we replacing the information that might have been shared through social media that is no longer operating in Russia? Are we looking specifically in that area?
So what I would say to you, without getting into it in too much detail, there are a large number of Russian independent journalists who are now active outside the country, who make use of the internet and Telegram and other channels to get truth into Russia. There are huge numbers of influencers and vloggers and videographers who are themselves working to push the truth into Russia, and I think that is partly why the Kremlin came down so hard on independent media. We ourselves were doing interviews at all levels with what was left of Russian independent media and any Russian state media that would have us, but we are continuing to work with lots of the journalists that we already had been working with, as have our allies and partners, and trying to find as many creative ways as we can to get truth into Russia.
Thank you. And finally, as you're aware, the European subcommittee did a hearing on the Black Sea region a month or so ago. And one of the things we heard is that the administration was working on a strategy for the Black Sea. Can you talk about how what Russia has done affects what that strategy might look like in the future?
I think the greatest concern is the fact that as Putin has installed more and more weapons and more sophisticated weapons onto the Crimean Peninsula, he has used that weaponry to threaten freedom of navigation and to claim greater and greater parts of the Black Sea well beyond territorial limits. You will remember from the fall, I can't remember the name of the British ship that came under fire when it was well in international waters. So we have a regular rotation of NATO exercises and U.S. exercises into the Black Sea to show presence and try to keep the Black Sea open. But we are also working on the capability of all of those states on the littoral, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey. And I will say that Turkey has taken some very strong moves since this conflict began under the Montreux Convention to deny warships access. So we are working on all of those things. And then the strategy will, of course, also look at cyber collaboration, economic integration, fishing, clean Black Sea, all of those things.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, Undersecretary Newland, welcome. I've done a fair amount of negotiating in my private sector life. Generally, when the negotiations proceed and I realize the negotiating partner is not negotiating in good faith, I walk away. Actually, always, if I'm not perceiving a good faith negotiation, I walk away. I've never, ever tried to negotiate with somebody who would refuse to even sit down and talk to me. But in fact, isn't that what's happening with the JCPOA negotiations right now? Iran refuses to meet with our negotiators?
So, Senator Johnson, we don't sit face-to-face with Iran, but we have nearly completed this agreement on the basis of the face-to-face negotiations that they do have with our European partners. So, you know, it's not ideal.
But it's true, Iran refuses to meet with us, correct? Isn't that an automatic admission that they're not good faith negotiations? Why would the administration, why would President Biden participate in something like that? That's a charade. It's not a negotiation.
Senator Johnson, I will say that I, too, have done a lot of negotiating in my life, and whereas it's not ideal not to sit in the same room, it can work, and proximity talks have been known to produce very good agreements. Over time, we will see if we can get there on this one.
Okay. Following up on Senator Rubio's questioning on Venezuela, it sounds like you really weren't talking about buying their oil. Is that true?
Senator, I'm happy to talk in some detail about all the contours of that trip in another setting, or perhaps in a little while. We are still in the process of working on a number of things there, but the primary purpose of that mission was to go see our 8 Americans who are incarcerated.
So again, Senator Rubio's more familiar with what their oil capacities are, but it sounds like they really couldn't add much to anything we would do. So, I mean, can you just state categorically that we will not be buying Venezuelan oil? We won't. If we're going to buy oil, we'll buy American oil. We won't buy it from a tyrant like Maduro.
Senator, let me try to put this whole oil issue in some context, if I may. When we ban Russian oil, as the President very clearly did today, that has an impact on all kinds of things. You know, we already have a situation, thanks to the international efforts that we have galvanized, where 70% of Russian fuel is stuck. But the particular kind of Russian fuel that the U.S. imports, or had been importing, was heavy fuel. And that is only produced in a couple of countries around the world. So whereas, you know, we want to ban Russian oil, we also need to find a way, if we do not want to have major economic impacts as a result of this war and this squeeze on oil around the world, we have to find a way to get more capacity into the system.
So again, you're not ruling out buying oil from the tyrant Maduro in Venezuela. You're not ruling that out.
I will come back to you on that question.
Okay. We have seen some protests in Russia. It seems like they're being suppressed pretty effectively. People are being jailed. What information are those individuals getting? How are they getting it? And what is the U.S. doing to make sure that the Russian people get more of the truth and less Russian propaganda?
Well, again, President Putin is scared of what we were already doing, so scared that he had to choke off the rest of what was left of the free press in Russia. But as I mentioned to Senator Shaheen, we and our allies have broad and deep relationships with lots of Russian journalists and lots of Russian brave influencers operating outside of Russia, who are able to push their information into Russia by various means. We also have RFERL, which, though it has been closed down in Russia, has a relatively sizable listenership and viewership through the web, through the internet, which the President Putin has not yet closed down in Russia. So we're working on lots of different ways to try to get truth into Russia. I will say that brave Ukrainians, whether they are individual citizens with their cell phones or Ukrainian journalists, have documented the same pictures that we are seeing on our TV are now being packaged by some of these Russian journalists to get back into Russia and to get the truth to them, despite President Putin's effort to blind his own people.
I hope part of the truth we're going to be broadcasting to Russia is just how much of the oligarchs Putin has stolen from the Russian people. I hope as we confiscate that wealth, which I hope we do, I hope we lay it out for the Russian people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Menendez. Thank you, Undersecretary Nuland, both for this hearing and for last night's classified briefing. I wish the American people could see the determined and strong and bipartisan engagement that I'm at least experiencing from this committee and from Congress. Over the weekend, more than 280 members of Congress took a call, participated in a call with President Zelensky. And if anything, I have been encouraged, even surprised at times, by the unanimity within Congress of support for stronger and stronger measures against Putin and Putin's Russia for his unjustified and immoral invasion of Ukraine. You've served for 32 years at least our nation and our public in the State Department and in other roles, and your advice and your insight is greatly appreciated and welcome. And I believe that President Biden's forceful leadership, the decision to proactively release intelligence in order to make it clear to Russia we knew what they were planning, to proactively invest time and effort and diplomatic resources in rebuilding our ties with the EU, with NATO, with other vital partners, laid the groundwork for what has been, in just 12 days, a striking, swift, broad action by the West to impose crippling sanctions on Russia and Russia's economy. I'm very concerned about the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. The United Nations is planning for 5 million refugees and 7 million internally displaced people. There are, as of today, 2 million Ukrainians who have fled the country, 1 million of them children. That's more in 12 days than fled Syria in 3 years. And I'm hopeful that this week we will pass an emergency supplemental for Ukraine that will be no less than $12 billion, and that more than half of that will be dedicated to the humanitarian crisis. Please help us understand the UN's playing a key role, the World Food Program, UNHCR, as well as, of course, USAID, and some other impressive private groups like World Central Kitchen are responding quickly. Our partners and allies like Poland, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, as you've mentioned, are responding. What more can we and should we do to meet this humanitarian crisis, which is coming on top of refugee and food insecurity crises in a dozen other countries around the world?
Senator Coons, I think you put your finger on it, that unfortunately, at 2 million refugees now, we may not have even half of what we will see here. What I will say is that they are fleeing into, by and large, European Union countries who are relatively prosperous, and they're doing a spectacular job in their own right of welcoming them, managing them. EU agencies are also, EU ECHO and others, working actively with the UN, and a large number of them are also going to relatives who already live in Europe. But that might be just the beginning of this, and I think as it gets worse, we'll have more and more of the infirm, of the young, of those who have special needs. So what we are trying to do is to ensure that we are continuing to get humanitarian assistance into Ukraine. You've seen the horrendous pictures of people sleeping, week after week now in subway stations or their bombed out houses, et cetera. The needs there appear to be moving from early on need for hygiene products and health products and those kinds of things to now needing foodstuffs and other things. And then we're trying to help Poland not only with its ability to flow through refugees, but with its border management, because that first day as they come off the border is where it's most congested. And
Senator
we are,
Shaheen and I were in Poland just 2 weeks ago and
you
are
saw,
impressed with the level of partnership. Let me just in closing mention, this supplemental will include something many of us have supported, more funding for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to try and get into Russia and Ukraine truthful, accurate reporting. I'm a co-sponsor as well of a resolution that's bipartisan condemning Russian war crimes and calling on international bodies like the ICC to investigate. And I want just to be reassured that we're doing everything we can to document the atrocities against civilians being committed by Russians and to hold Russia's military and political leadership, and specifically Vladimir Putin, accountable for crimes against humanity.
so to say there, it is Ukrainians who are doing a spectacular job as they confront these horrific incidents in getting documentation and ensuring that they get that out to the world, and we are preparing as an international community to respond to all of that and to deal with it, and to hold Putin accountable, as well as those who helped him prosecute this war.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate your willingness to provide this information.